The girl's life in the village was marked by simplicity, routine, and quiet diligence. From the earliest hours of dawn, while the first light stretched across the sky and dew still clung to the leaves, she could be seen moving through the narrow dirt lanes of her village. Her feet were bare, toughened over years of walking to fetch water, carry firewood, and complete the chores that sustained her small household. Though her appearance reflected a life of labor, calloused hands, worn clothes, and cracked, tired feet, there was a natural grace in her movements, a sense of purpose that seemed to flow from within. She carried herself with humility, never seeking praise or attention, yet there was an undeniable air of resilience that marked her every step. Each day began with the familiar rhythm of her household tasks. She would sweep the courtyard, arrange the firewood, and ensure that her modest home was ready for the day. Despite the long hours and constant toil, she maintained an attitude of kindness toward all she encountered. If she passed an elder struggling with their load, she would offer help without hesitation. If a child tripped along the path, she would stoop to check that no injury occurred. Her gentleness and willingness to serve others earned her respect quietly, even if the villagers were slow to recognize her inner strength. Her heart was generous, and though she had little in material wealth, she possessed an abundance of patience and empathy, which made her indispensable to the community in subtle ways. The market was the stage where her diligence and character became most visible. She arrived early each morning, carrying baskets of produce or handmade goods to sell, ensuring they were neatly arranged to appeal to buyers. While others vied for attention through loud calls or aggressive bargaining, she preferred to let her work speak for itself. Her movements were precise, her speech calm and courteous, and her eyes always attentive to the needs of those around her. Villagers noticed her unwavering composure, though some mocked her quiet manner, unable to comprehend that her strength lay not in shouting or forcing herself into the spotlight, but in the steady, patient pursuit of duty and integrity. Her relationship with the market was not merely transactional, it was a reflection of her character. She observed the ebb and flow of human nature with careful eyes, understanding when to offer advice, when to lend a helping hand, and when to remain silent. Children often followed her, curious about the way she moved through the crowds without losing a sense of calm. Travelers passing through remarked on her presence, sensing something uncommon about her, an aura of resilience and grace that suggested she was more than just an ordinary village girl. Even among the noise, the haggling, and the chaos of the marketplace, she maintained a kind of quiet authority that drew attention not through force, but through the strength of her spirit. Despite her humble circumstances, she exhibited remarkable resourcefulness. She knew how to stretch meager supplies to last through the week, how to repair her worn shoes and mended clothes, and how to keep her modest stall in the market tidy and appealing. Her hands, though roughened by labor, moved with care, crafting displays and arranging goods so that buyers would notice the quality beneath their simplicity. Villagers occasionally commented on her diligence, remarking that she seemed tireless, as if her spirit alone fueled her endless labor. Yet she never let pride or vanity enter her heart. Every task was performed with the quiet understanding that work itself was a form of service, both to her family and to the community that relied on her. Her kindness was evident not just in action but in attitude. She listened patiently to complaints, offered gentle advice when asked, and comforted those who had no one else to turn to. It was this combination of humility and quiet strength that made her remarkable, for while others sought recognition or power, she found purpose in her steadfastness. Even when villagers whispered behind her back, questioning why she did not assert herself more aggressively, she remained undeterred. She understood that true resilience was not always seen or praised, and that enduring hardship with grace was itself a kind of quiet triumph. Evenings were spent reflecting and preparing for the next day. She would sit near the fire, repairing tools or mending clothes, and sometimes watch the stars as they emerged over the village, contemplating the small role she played in the larger world around her. Though her body bore the marks of relentless labor, aching muscles, rough hands, cracked feet, her spirit remained unbroken. There was an unspoken pride in her endurance, a recognition that her diligence and integrity were worth more than the fleeting admiration of the village. Through every aspect of her life, whether performing household chores, tending to her market stall, or helping neighbors in need, she exhibited a combination of humility, kindness, and resilience that quietly set her apart. Even as some villagers chose to mock or envy her, she moved through her daily life with a steadfast dignity, unconcerned with their opinions. Her presence in the village was like a quiet current beneath the surface, unseen by some, but shaping the flow of the community in ways they could not immediately perceive. In the market, children learned by watching her. Travelers remembered her for days after passing through. Villagers, whether aware or not, were influenced by her perseverance, her patience, and her unwavering kindness. Every cracked foot, calloused hand, and weary sigh told a story not of weakness, but of strength, endurance, and the silent power of a heart committed to goodness. She embodied the notion that dignity and resilience are not always loud or visible, but they are felt and remembered by those who witness them. Her life, though humble in circumstance, became a living testament to the virtues of hard work, steadfastness, and quiet heroism. By the end of each day, no matter how taxing, she returned home with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that her efforts had been for the benefit of her family and community. Her cracked feet and tired hands were marks of honor rather than shame, and each small accomplishment built her strength in ways that would later prove vital. The village may not have fully understood her inner power, but in her silent labor, her consistent kindness, and her patient endurance, she laid the foundation for the extraordinary events that were yet to unfold in her life. The girl's presence in the village had always drawn attention, though she never sought it. Her kind heart, diligent work ethic, and quiet grace made her beloved by some, but it also awakened envy in others. Among the villagers, whispers began as soft murmurs in the marketplace, comments under the shade of trees, and glances exchanged during communal gatherings. These whispers were small at first, easy to ignore, but over time they grew louder, more pointed, and more focused on the girl's every action. Her integrity, which she wore like a shield, became a target for those who saw their own shortcomings reflected in her goodness. Her beauty, understated and natural, was another catalyst for envy. It was not the kind of beauty that demanded attention, but the quiet, radiant kind that people couldn't help noticing. Her eyes, always observant yet gentle, seemed to hold the calm wisdom of someone far beyond her years. Her hair, though usually tied simply, carried a sheen that glinted in the sunlight, and her movements were measured and graceful. To some villagers, this understated elegance was inspiring. To others, it was infuriating. They began comparing themselves and their children to her, feeling a growing sense of inadequacy that turned quickly into resentment. The gossip began subtly. A merchant would mention that the girl always carried herself better than most, even while enduring the hardships of her labor. A neighbor would whisper that she treated elders with more respect than others her age. Children who had been taught to follow her example were quietly praised in public, only deepening the envy of adults who felt their own authority and influence challenged. Over time, these murmurs evolved into stories, each exaggerated more than the last, painting her as someone who stood above ordinary villagers in ways that seemed unnatural. Family members, particularly those with less patience or less virtue, were not immune. Her presence in the household, her diligence and attentiveness, highlighted their own flaws. The stepmother, in particular, began to seethe silently. Each act of kindness the girl performed, each successful transaction in the market, and each small gesture of respect from neighbors reminded her of the girl's superiority. It was not merely admiration, it was a gnawing envy that grew with each day. The girl's quiet resilience, her unwavering calm under stress, and her visible dedication to others became constant irritants, forcing family members to confront their own shortcomings. The village itself had a culture where reputation mattered deeply. Achievements were measured not only in material success but in social influence, perceived cleverness, and ability to maintain appearances. The girl, through her simple goodness, unintentionally threatened this fragile social order. Villagers began to view her as an anomaly, someone who did not conform to the petty rivalries and self-serving agendas that dominated daily life. Her consistency and character made the rest of the community uneasy. The more she maintained her dignity, the more they felt compelled to tear her down. Small incidents were magnified through gossip. If she helped an elder carry water, someone would claim she did it to show off. If she sold produce honestly, others suggested she was trying to earn favor from those who mattered. Each innocent act became distorted in the retelling, creating a narrative that she was manipulative, overly perfect, or even slightly cunning. The more these stories circulated, the more the tension in the village grew. The envy that had started as quiet murmurs began to manifest in looks of disdain, curt gestures, and subtle acts of sabotage meant to undermine her. The spread of gossip was accelerated by the market, a place where villagers and travelers alike gathered, observed, and exchanged news. Here, even small exaggerations were amplified. Traders passing through would share stories of the girl's remarkable qualities, inadvertently fueling resentment among local villagers who felt eclipsed. Mothers would caution their children about the girl, framing her kindness as something to envy rather than emulate. Elders, usually silent observers, whispered warnings about her, claiming that such unusual virtue could not go unchallenged. These stories began shaping public perception, slowly isolating the girl from those who might otherwise defend or support her. Despite this growing tension, the girl remained largely unaware of the full extent of the envy she inspired. Her focus was on her work, her family duties, and the small joys she found in daily life. She continued to help, to serve, and to act with kindness, even as eyes followed her suspiciously, and whispered comments filled the spaces around her. Her resilience and humility were both her protection and, paradoxically, the reason for others' growing malice. Those who envied her were trapped in a cycle of comparison and resentment, unable to appreciate her virtues and instead seeking to find fault where none truly existed. Over time, the village's collective envy coalesced into a subtle hostility. Remarks became sharper, glances colder, and small acts of sabotage more frequent. Someone might intentionally knock over her baskets at the market or spread exaggerated tales of her mistakes, seeking to diminish her reputation. Even those who were not outright cruel began to avoid her, influenced by the stories and the tension in the air. The girl's daily life, once filled with quiet harmony, now existed under the watchful eyes of those who resented her simply for being herself. Yet even amidst this envy and growing tension, her strength and kindness remained intact. She endured the silent judgments, the whispered criticisms, and the envy-laden glances without complaint. In her calm, consistent manner, she displayed the very qualities that inspired both admiration and jealousy, unknowingly preparing herself for the trials that were to come. The seeds of envy had been sown, growing steadily in the minds of villagers and family members, creating the fertile ground for conflict, cruelty, and ultimately the dramatic turn of events that would test her resilience and reveal the extraordinary force that would defend her. The market was alive with the usual bustle of early morning trade, the calls of merchants hawking their wares, the clatter of baskets and crates, and the steady murmur of villagers haggling over prices. Among them moved the girl, carrying her own simple goods, her bare feet pressing against the uneven, dusty ground. Her toes were cracked and red from constant labor, the skin rough and calloused, yet she moved with grace, placing her baskets carefully and speaking softly to those who approached her stall. Despite her quiet presence, she could not escape the prying eyes of those whose envy and malice had been quietly growing over the weeks. It began as a small, pointed remark, barely audible, from a woman standing nearby. "Look at her feet," the woman said, her voice tinged with derision. "All cracked and worn. No wonder she walks like she carries the weight of the world." Others nearby heard the comment and stifled laughs, their amusement feeding off one another, spiraling into louder and more mocking tones. Soon, the crowd surrounding her began to swell as more villagers paused to observe, curious about the object of ridicule. The girl noticed the glances and the whispers but did not respond. She lowered her head slightly, trying to continue her work without drawing attention to herself. Yet the mocking voices grew bolder. A man pointed at her feet, exaggerating her limp from fatigue, and shouted, "Is that how you serve your family? How you face the world?" Another chuckled, adding, "Perhaps she thinks the earth will soften for her?" Laughter erupted around her, and some villagers began making crude imitations of her movements, exaggerating her steps and the careful way she adjusted her baskets. Children, too, were caught up in the spectacle. They repeated phrases they had overheard from adults, mimicking her cracked-footed walk in a crude parody. Even some of the more neutral villagers could not help but glance and comment, caught between sympathy and the contagious nature of public mockery. The girl's chest tightened as humiliation spread over her like a wave, yet she remained silent. Every word, every laugh, seemed to pierce deeper than any physical blow could, and her fingers clenched slightly as she fought to maintain composure. Her cracked feet throbbed painfully, each step reminding her of the endless labor she endured to sustain her small household. The hot dust of the market ground into the cracks, sending sharp pangs of discomfort that she quietly endured. Yet it was not the physical pain that weighed heaviest on her, it was the public derision, the deliberate attempts to belittle her hard work and her resilience. She had hoped that her humility and perseverance would protect her from cruelty, but the villagers, now emboldened by each other's laughter, saw an opportunity to assert their superiority at her expense. A group of men gathered near her stall, hurling crude remarks and laughing boisterously. "Is that all the girl can do? Walk and moan?" one of them mocked. "Look at those feet. How does she expect to prosper with such weak steps?" Their voices grew louder, commanding attention, and more people in the market turned to watch. Some stopped their business entirely, drawn into the spectacle, while others whispered among themselves, debating the propriety of such public humiliation. The girl's silence became more pronounced as the crowd's laughter intensified. She avoided eye contact, letting her hands continue their work while her heart ached with a mixture of shame and quiet indignation. She had no words to defend herself, and even if she did, it seemed likely that the villagers would have ignored any attempt at explanation. Their glee was not in correcting injustice but in asserting dominance over someone they perceived as different, someone who had not conformed to their expectations of weakness and submission. Amid the growing crowd, some villagers began to sense the cruelty in the mockery. They felt a subtle unease, though few dared to speak out. The laughter of the malicious grew, fueled by the passive complicity of those who watched silently. Every jeer, every pointed finger was an effort to break her spirit, to remind her, and themselves, that she was at their mercy. Yet, for all the malice, the girl's endurance began to radiate in small, almost imperceptible ways. Her patience, the gentle steadiness with which she carried out her work despite the ridicule, set her apart in ways the villagers could not comprehend. By mid-morning, the market had transformed from a place of commerce to a stage for her humiliation. Cries of mockery were interspersed with shouts of laughter, while the girl continued to work silently. Some merchants, wary of interrupting the spectacle, merely shook their heads, feeling pity but powerless to intervene. Travelers passing through the village paused to observe the scene, noting the intensity of the public derision and the girl's remarkable composure. Though they could not yet discern the full measure of her resilience, they would later remember her presence, a quiet force standing against a tide of ridicule. Throughout the ordeal, the girl's mind wandered to the countless hours she had spent tending to her family and community, the small sacrifices she had made daily, and the gentle care she had shown to everyone around her. None of these efforts had prepared her for this kind of cruelty, yet she found a strange strength in recalling them. With each jeer and mocking glance, she resolved silently to endure, knowing that her dignity could not be stripped away by mere words or laughter. As the market day continued, the intensity of the mockery reached its peak. The villagers, caught up in collective scorn, were unaware that their actions were sowing the seeds of consequences far beyond their understanding. The girl, though trembling inside from the weight of humiliation, held herself upright, her cracked feet grounding her not just physically but spiritually. She would endure this public shame, and though they mocked her now, the echoes of their cruelty would eventually awaken a force they could not anticipate. The girl stood amidst the chaos of the market, the laughter of the villagers echoing in her ears like a relentless drum. Every mocking glance, every whispered insult, was a weight pressing down on her shoulders, yet she did not retaliate, did not cry out, and did not falter in her steps. Her cracked feet ached from constant labor, the dust and uneven stones of the marketplace biting into her skin, but she remained upright, steady, and composed. Her endurance was not born from ignorance of the cruelty around her. She was fully aware of each scornful word and pointed finger, yet she refused to let them shape her spirit. Patience had been a constant companion throughout her life, cultivated from years of toil and the quiet hardships that marked her days. She had learned early that reacting in anger or despair rarely brought relief or resolution. Instead, she had honed the ability to withstand discomfort, to breathe deeply and center herself even when the world seemed intent on causing pain. In this moment of public ridicule, that strength became her shield. While the villagers laughed and mocked, she maintained an air of calm that, though subtle, radiated from her and began to draw attention in unexpected ways. Her dignity manifested in small, deliberate gestures. She adjusted her baskets carefully, ensuring that the goods she had labored to arrange were not disturbed by the pushing crowd. She moved with grace, lifting her head slightly, meeting the eyes of curious onlookers with quiet composure. Her hands, though tired and calloused, continued to work with precision. In her stillness, she exuded a strength far greater than brute force or loud protest. It was a power of endurance, of patience, and of quiet resolve that set her apart from everyone else in the marketplace. The villagers, caught up in their collective cruelty, were initially blind to the quiet force she projected. Their eyes were fixed on her cracked feet, on the perceived weakness they so eagerly sought to exploit. They mocked, they jeered, and they attempted to break her spirit with ridicule and laughter. Yet each attempt only highlighted her resilience. The more they tried to undermine her, the more apparent it became that she possessed an inner fortitude they could neither understand nor diminish. This silent endurance became a subtle rebuke, a contrast to their noisy, fleeting cruelty. The girl's mind remained calm, even as her body throbbed with pain. She reflected on the countless trials she had already faced, the relentless chores, the harsh words, the subtle betrayals. Each hardship had been a lesson in patience, teaching her to bear suffering with grace and to find strength where others might see only weakness. Now, in the face of public mockery, Those lessons crystallized into action. Not action in the form of resistance but in the act of remaining steadfast. Her endurance was a quiet rebellion, an unspoken statement that no amount of scorn could alter her essence. As the crowd pressed closer, attempting to provoke a reaction, she held her composure. Villagers shouted insults, children mimicked her movements, and strangers gawked in curiosity, but her calm remained unshaken. There was a rhythm to her endurance, almost meditative, as if each step and each breath reaffirmed her resolve. Her eyes, though reflecting the pain of humiliation, also carried a quiet defiance. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Her suffering would remain her own, controlled and untainted by their mockery. Observers, too, began to notice the contrast between her demeanor and the villagers' cruelty. Some merchants paused mid-transaction, struck by the unusual strength of her quiet composure. A few travelers whispered among themselves, noting the way she carried herself despite the ridicule. Even those who were part of the mocking crowd felt a subtle unease, an instinctive recognition that her calmness was not mere resignation but a sign of something deeper, something beyond ordinary endurance. This awareness spread slowly, quietly planting seeds of doubt and respect among those who had previously joined in the derision. Her silent endurance also had a transformative effect on herself. As she moved through the market, each step reinforced her sense of self, her dignity, and her understanding that her worth was not determined by the opinions of others. She drew strength from the very act of enduring, discovering that patience in the face of cruelty could be empowering. Every laugh, every jeer, became a reminder of her capacity to rise above the pettiness around her, to maintain integrity when others sought to diminish it. Despite the sharp pangs of embarrassment and the physical pain from her cracked feet, she began to notice a subtle shift in the energy around her. The villagers' laughter seemed to falter at times, replaced by murmurs of uncertainty. Their confidence, which had fueled the cruelty, wavered as they subconsciously recognized her resilience. She did not change her behavior, did not issue warnings or threats, but simply remained steadfast. It was as though her very presence, calm, unwavering, and dignified, created a quiet resistance that even the collective mockery could not overcome. By the afternoon, the market's chaos had begun to shift subtly. While some continued their ridicule, others held back, unsure whether to join in. The girl's silent endurance had introduced an unexpected tension. The energy of cruelty was now tempered by the recognition of her inner strength. She walked among the crowd with a composed grace, allowing her dignity to speak louder than the jeers surrounding her. Each step, though painful, became a testament to her character, and her perseverance began to plant a quiet seed of awe and respect in those watching. Through it all, the girl's calmness remained her greatest ally. She did not retaliate, she did not complain, and she did not beg for mercy. Instead, she endured with patience and quiet fortitude, transforming humiliation into a crucible for inner strength. By standing tall amidst mockery, she demonstrated that true power often lies not in overt action, but in the capacity to withstand cruelty with grace, dignity, and unwavering resolve. Her silent endurance contrasted sharply with the loud, shallow cruelty of the villagers, leaving an indelible impression on the marketplace that would linger long after the laughter had faded. The girl stood amidst the chaos of the market, the laughter of the villagers echoing in her ears like a relentless drum. Every mocking glance, every whispered insult, was a weight pressing down on her shoulders, yet she did not retaliate, did not cry out, and did not falter in her steps. Her cracked feet ached from constant labor, the dust and uneven stones of the marketplace biting into her skin, but she remained upright, steady, and composed. Her endurance was not born from ignorance of the cruelty around her. She was fully aware of each scornful word and pointed finger, yet she refused to let them shape her spirit. Patience had been a constant companion throughout her life, cultivated from years of toil and the quiet hardships that marked her days. She had learned early that reacting in anger or despair rarely brought relief or resolution. Instead, she had honed the ability to withstand discomfort, to breathe deeply and center herself even when the world seemed intent on causing pain. In this moment of public ridicule, that strength became her shield. While the villagers laughed and mocked, she maintained an air of calm that, though subtle, radiated from her and began to draw attention in unexpected ways. Her dignity manifested in small, deliberate gestures. She adjusted her baskets carefully, ensuring that the goods she had labored to arrange were not disturbed by the pushing crowd. She moved with grace, lifting her head slightly, meeting the eyes of curious onlookers with quiet composure. Her hands, though tired and calloused, continued to work with precision. In her stillness, she exuded a strength far greater than brute force or loud protest, It was a power of endurance, of patience, and of quiet resolve that set her apart from everyone else in the marketplace. The villagers, caught up in their collective cruelty, were initially blind to the quiet force she projected. Their eyes were fixed on her cracked feet, on the perceived weakness they so eagerly sought to exploit. They mocked, they jeered, and they attempted to break her spirit with ridicule and laughter. Yet each attempt only highlighted her resilience. The more they tried to undermine her, the more apparent it became that she possessed an inner fortitude they could neither understand nor diminish. This silent endurance became a subtle rebuke, a contrast to their noisy, fleeting cruelty. The girl's mind remained calm, even as her body throbbed with pain. She reflected on the countless trials she had already faced, the relentless chores, the harsh words, the subtle betrayals. Each hardship had been a lesson in patience, teaching her to bear suffering with grace and to find strength where others might see only weakness. Now, in the face of public mockery, those lessons crystallized into action, not action in the form of resistance but in the act of remaining steadfast. Her endurance was a quiet rebellion, an unspoken statement that no amount of scorn could alter her essence. As the crowd pressed closer, attempting to provoke a reaction, she held her composure. Villagers shouted insults, children mimicked her movements, and strangers gawked in curiosity, but her calm remained unshaken. There was a rhythm to her endurance, almost meditative, as if each step and each breath reaffirmed her resolve. Her eyes, though reflecting the pain of humiliation, also carried a quiet defiance. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Her suffering would remain her own, controlled and untainted by their mockery. Observers, too, began to notice the contrast between her demeanor and the villagers' cruelty. Some merchants paused mid-transaction, struck by the unusual strength of her quiet composure. A few travelers whispered among themselves, noting the way she carried herself despite the ridicule. Even those who were part of the mocking crowd felt a subtle unease, an instinctive recognition that her calmness was not mere resignation but a sign of something deeper, something beyond ordinary endurance. This awareness spread slowly, quietly planting seeds of doubt and respect among those who had previously joined in the derision. Her silent endurance also had a transformative effect on herself. As she moved through the market, each step reinforced her sense of self, her dignity, and her understanding that her worth was not determined by the opinions of others. She drew strength from the very act of enduring, discovering that patience in the face of cruelty could be empowering. Every laugh, every jeer, became a reminder of her capacity to rise above the pettiness around her, to maintain integrity when others sought to diminish it. Despite the sharp pangs of embarrassment and the physical pain from her cracked feet, she began to notice a subtle shift in the energy around her. The villagers' laughter seemed to falter at times, replaced by murmurs of uncertainty. Their confidence, which had fueled the cruelty, wavered as they subconsciously recognized her resilience. She did not change her behavior, did not issue warnings or threats, but simply remained steadfast. It was as though her very presence, calm, unwavering, and dignified, created a quiet resistance that even the collective mockery could not overcome. By the afternoon, the market's chaos had begun to shift subtly. While some continued their ridicule, others held back, unsure whether to join in. The girl's silent endurance had introduced an unexpected tension. The energy of cruelty was now tempered by the recognition of her inner strength. She walked among the crowd with a composed grace, allowing her dignity to speak louder than the jeers surrounding her. Each step, though painful, became a testament to her character, and her perseverance began to plant a quiet seed of awe and respect in those watching. Through it all, the girl's calmness remained her greatest ally. She did not retaliate, she did not complain, and she did not beg for mercy. Instead, she endured with patience and quiet fortitude, transforming humiliation into a crucible for inner strength. By standing tall amidst mockery, she demonstrated that true power often lies not in overt action, but in the capacity to withstand cruelty with grace, dignity, and unwavering resolve. Her silent endurance contrasted sharply with the loud, shallow cruelty of the villagers, leaving an indelible impression on the marketplace that would linger long after the laughter had faded. The market square, once filled with the raucous laughter and loud mockery directed at the girl, began to change in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. At first it was only a sense, a faint discomfort in the air, a prickling on the skin, that some villagers could not ignore. They had been so consumed with their cruel entertainment, so confident in their collective superiority, that the tiny tremors and odd shifts beneath their feet went unnoticed. But as the minutes passed, a quiet awareness spread, small but insistent, like the whispered caution of something ancient watching from below. The girl continued her silent work, adjusting her baskets and arranging her simple wares with practiced care. She did not look up, nor did she acknowledge the growing unease around her. Yet, the ground beneath her cracked and hardened feet seemed to respond to her presence. Each step she took pressed into the earth as if it recognized her dignity and resilience. Those who mocked her first noticed small, almost invisible changes. A slight tremor beneath the soles of their shoes, a sudden shift in dust and pebbles, and an unsettling coolness in the air where she walked. At first, the villagers brushed these sensations aside, blaming uneven stones or minor tremors from distant activity. But as the laughter grew louder, so did the subtle reactions of the ground. Merchants felt the tips of their baskets wobble as if unseen hands nudged them. Crates teetered slightly, their contents rattling in protest. Children shivered inexplicably, and some even stumbled without clear cause. Those sensitive to the environment, a few older villagers, seasoned farmers who had spent lifetimes reading the land, paused and exchanged worried glances. Something was different, something beyond their understanding, and it was linked to the girl, who remained calm and composed amidst the growing tension. Her cracked feet had been a source of mockery, but now, in a strange twist of fate, they seemed to imbue the earth with quiet magic. Every time she shifted her weight, a subtle hum of life seemed to rise from beneath her, as if the soil, the stones, and even the very dust were acknowledging her suffering and endurance. The villagers who had once laughed at her now began to notice an uncomfortable sensation, a prickling, almost tickling pressure beneath their feet that made their heels ache and toes tense. It was as though the ground itself was awake, aware of their cruelty, and beginning to react in ways they could not yet comprehend. The girl herself felt nothing unusual. She remained focused, calm, and grounded. Her awareness was inward, tuned to her own patience and dignity rather than the murmuring shifts of the earth. Yet, in some inexplicable way, the earth seemed to recognize her spirit. Tiny sprouts of grass peeked through cracks in the stone floor, the dust seemed to rise lightly around her steps, and the faint scent of fresh soil mingled with the air. It was a silent affirmation, a quiet declaration that while she endured humiliation and cruelty, she was not powerless. The land itself had taken notice. Those closest to her mockery, particularly the villagers who had shouted the cruelest insults, felt the unease most acutely. A merchant who had pointed at her cracked feet found his basket tipping inexplicably, spilling fruit onto the ground. A group of children laughing at her stumbled slightly as the dirt beneath them shifted. The more they tried to assert dominance, the more subtle disturbances occurred. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "Did you feel that? The ground, it's strange here." Some tried to laugh it off, but the tension had begun to grow, the first seeds of fear planted where arrogance had once flourished. Even the older villagers who had initially watched passively, began to speak in hushed tones. "Perhaps we went too far," one said, glancing at the girl with a mixture of awe and worry. "I have never felt the earth react like this," whispered another, eyes darting to her feet. Their unease grew with each passing moment, as if the soil itself were speaking through tremors and shifts, silently condemning the cruelty they had inflicted. For the first time, the villagers felt the weight of their actions, the subtle judgment of the world beneath them. The girl continued to move among the market stalls, serene and steady, unaffected by the faint quivers and shifts. Yet each subtle motion of the earth seemed to empower her, reinforcing her silent strength and her calm endurance. She understood, without thinking, that something extraordinary was taking place. The land, long a silent witness to her suffering, was beginning to respond. Not with fury or immediate punishment, but with a measured, patient acknowledgement of her virtue and the injustice she endured. As the day progressed, the murmurs of unease grew louder. Villagers who had mocked her earliest now glanced nervously at the ground beneath their feet. Even those who had not joined in the ridicule felt a subtle pressure, a warning, as if the earth were quietly signaling that cruelty would not go unnoticed. The girl, however, remained steadfast, her movements deliberate and calm, her patience unbroken. In her silent endurance, she had already begun to command a kind of respect that no words or displays of strength could rival. By evening, the atmosphere in the marketplace had shifted. The laughter of the cruel was no longer as confident, it carried a nervous edge. Some tried to dismiss the strange sensations, attributing them to coincidence or imagination, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The ground, subtly alive and responsive, had begun its quiet work, awakening a sense of accountability and unease among those who had sought to humiliate her. And through it all, the girl remained untouched, not just physically but in spirit, her dignity and patience shining in stark contrast to the faltering cruelty of the villagers around her. As the villagers' mockery reached a crescendo, the air in the marketplace grew tense with anticipation, though none dared to acknowledge it openly. Laughter rang out in harsh, grating tones, punctuated by jeers and pointed fingers aimed at the girls' cracked, weary feet. Their cruelty had reached a fever pitch. Even the most restrained villagers who had watched from the edges now leaned in, curious and complicit in the spectacle. But in the midst of this frenzy, subtle changes began to stir beneath the feet of those who laughed the loudest. At first, it was almost imperceptible. A faint heat radiated from the earth under the mockers' shoes, so subtle that it could easily have been dismissed as the midday sun pressing down on the stones. Yet, as the cruelty escalated, the warmth intensified. Dust near the heels of the loudest offenders began to swirl lightly, as though the ground itself were exhaling in response to their venomous laughter. Tiny wisps of smoke rose from the cracks in the dirt, curling upwards and twisting like smoke from a distant fire. Most villagers were too engrossed in their mockery to notice, but a few began to glance down, eyes widening with sudden unease. The girl, as always, remained calm, her attention focused inward rather than on the chaos around her. She could feel, in some inexplicable way, the growing tension beneath the surface, the earth responding to the injustice, quietly preparing to intervene. Her patience and dignity seemed to feed this hidden force, and for the first time, those who had sought to humiliate her began to sense that their laughter carried consequences beyond their comprehension. A merchant who had led the most vicious jeers felt a sharp prickling at the soles of his feet. He looked down and noticed smoke curling around his sandals. Panic crept into his chest, mingling with confusion. He shuffled backward, trying to escape the inexplicable heat, but the ground seemed to cling to him, holding him in place just long enough for the sensation to intensify. Another villager, a woman who had thrown a small stone at the girl, recoiled as the dust beneath her began to darken and smolder. Her laughter faltered, replaced by a shiver of fear that snaked up her spine. The crowd's attention slowly began to shift. Whispers spread among the onlookers. "Do you feel that? The ground, it's burning." Some tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in their throats. Eyes darted nervously toward the girl, who continued to work silently, her cracked feet unheeding of the rising heat. The contrast between her calm and the growing fear of the cruel became impossible to ignore. Each spark and wisp of smoke seemed to emanate not from ordinary fire, but from the earth itself, an elemental response to injustice. The heat under the mockers' feet grew unevenly, rising in patches that made it difficult to stand. Their movements became jerky, hesitant, as though the ground was asserting its will. Fear seeped into their hearts, slow and insidious. The loudest voices faltered, their confident laughter transformed into uneasy murmurs. Something beyond human understanding was at play, something that made them question their safety, their choices, and the cruelty they had inflicted. The girl's presence remained serene, almost luminous in contrast to the panic growing beneath the cruel villagers. The first spark of the earth's response was small, subtle, but it was enough to plant fear where arrogance and mockery had reigned. The air, thick with heat and faint smoke, carried a silent warning. Cruelty would not go unpunished, and innocence held powers that the ignorant could neither see nor control. By the time the sun had shifted slightly in the sky, the cruel villagers' confidence had cracked. The first spark had ignited more than smoke and warmth. It had ignited fear, the primal understanding that the natural world had taken notice of their actions. The marketplace, once a theater of humiliation, had begun to feel charged with a quiet, inexorable justice. And through it all, the girl remained unharmed, a beacon of calm amid the rising tremors and flickering sparks beneath those who had sought to diminish her. The laughter of the cruel villagers had reached a deafening pitch, echoing across the market square as if daring the world itself to intervene. Their jeers and mocking gestures targeted the girl's cracked, tired feet, oblivious to the growing tension in the air. What began as subtle warmth beneath their soles had now intensified into a tangible, almost unbearable heat. The earth, long patient and silent, had awakened fully, responding to the cruelty with an undeniable, primal force. At first, the ground beneath the mockers' feet cracked slightly, hairline fissures spiderwebbing outward in response to their venomous laughter. Dust and small stones jittered along the fractures, tumbling into the tiny gaps. Wisps of smoke began curling upward from these fissures, swirling like phantom fingers reaching for the sky. Each crack and plume seemed to carry intention, a silent declaration that the land would no longer tolerate such injustice. Villagers who had been mere bystanders glanced nervously at the scene, feeling unease prickling at the backs of their necks. Even those who had not actively mocked her sensed the tension in the earth, a subtle vibration that ran through the soles of their feet. The cruel villagers were the first to notice the true intensity of the awakening. Their laughter faltered as heat began to rise sharply, radiating from the ground like waves of fire licking at their ankles. Sandals scorched, toes burned, and the air shimmered above the cracked stone in a haze of heat and smoke. Panic began to creep into their hearts, replacing arrogance with fear. They stamped and shuffled, trying to escape the invisible flames, but the ground beneath them seemed to twist and warp, keeping them tethered in place. Each movement only worsened the sensation, as if the earth itself were rejecting them, demanding penance for their cruelty. The girl, standing calmly amidst the chaos, felt none of the heat or trembling. Her cracked feet touched the ground with a quiet dignity, pressing into the soil as though drawing strength from it. Around her, the earth responded differently, softening, pulsing with energy that seemed attuned to her presence. Tiny tufts of grass sprouted along her path, fresh and green, while dust danced lightly around her, a visual testament to the awakening power at work. It was a stark contrast to the torment beneath the feet of those who sought to humiliate her, emphasizing the justice inherent in the natural world. Cracks widened beneath the cruel villagers' feet, jagged lines forming irregular patterns that threatened to trip and unbalance them. Smoke poured from these fissures in thicker plumes now, coiling around ankles and legs, teasing panic from the perpetrators. Some tried to leap away, but each movement seemed to invite more chaos. The cracks grew, more smoke rose, and the ground beneath them shivered in defiance. Their voices, once harsh and mocking, were now strained with fear, faltering in a chorus of alarmed exclamations. The air above the market seemed to vibrate with energy, carrying a faint, acrid scent of heated stone and soil. Children in the crowd cried out in alarm, clutching their parents' hands, while the merchants and elders watched with awe and growing dread. Every crack, every plume of smoke, every shudder of the earth was a message. The cruelty they had sown had awakened a force far older and wiser than themselves. The ground was no longer passive, it had become a participant in the scene, a living witness enacting subtle but undeniable justice. The girl moved carefully among the stalls, unperturbed by the chaos erupting around her. Her steps seemed to amplify the earth's response under the mockers, as though her dignity and calm were the key that guided the force. The heat and smoke intensified beneath those who had been cruelest, tongues of fire and molten-scented air licking at the heels of their shoes. Some villagers dropped their baskets or goods in frantic attempts to retreat, but the fissures widened unpredictably, forcing them to stumble or leap, only to find another crack opening in their path. Fear transformed into desperation. The once boastful villagers now trembled as the earth beneath their feet seemed to undulate and pulse with life. The air shimmered with heat, carrying a low hum, like the growl of an unseen creature. Smoke curled and twisted around them, and the smell of scorched earth filled their nostrils. Their shouts became frantic cries for mercy, echoing across the marketplace, but the girl remained untouched, a figure of serene authority amidst the chaos. By mid-afternoon, the market square had become a theater of supernatural justice. The cruel villagers, trapped in the cracks, enveloped by smoke and trembling earth, were unable to maintain their bravado. Whispers of awe and fear spread among the onlookers. The ground, it burns for them, but not for her. The awakening earth had chosen its side, protecting the innocent while punishing the cruel. The girl's calm endurance had catalyzed the natural world's retribution, turning the marketplace into a place of wonder and terror simultaneously. The heat, smoke, and trembling gradually subsided, leaving behind scorched marks where the cruelest villagers had stood, while the girl's path remained untouched, green and vibrant as if blessed. The lesson was clear: cruelty to the innocent awakens forces beyond human understanding, and the earth itself becomes an instrument of justice when virtue is tested. The girl's silent strength and dignity had not only preserved her but had mobilized the natural world to enact consequences on those who had mocked her suffering. The marketplace, now still in the aftermath of the earth's sudden upheaval, held an eerie silence. The smoke from the fissures had begun to dissipate, curling lazily into the air, and the cracked ground beneath the cruel villagers had cooled, leaving faint scorches that served as a reminder of the punishment they had endured. Amidst this quiet chaos, the girl stood unscathed, her cracked feet resting lightly on the earth, her posture serene and unbroken. A subtle glow seemed to radiate from her, not harsh like fire, but steady and compelling, a silent authority that drew the eyes of every onlooker. Her rising power was not outwardly violent. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The air around her vibrated faintly as though responding to her presence. Even the gentle breeze seemed to carry an echo of her dignity, brushing against the scorched ground and whispering through the marketplace in soft waves. Those who had mocked her only moments ago could not meet her gaze, feeling a strange reverence mingled with fear. The contrast between her composed authority and their shaken arrogance was stark, like the calm eye of a storm surrounded by turbulence. Every step she took resonated with a mystical energy. As her foot pressed into the earth, the soil seemed to pulse beneath her, alive and attuned to her spirit. Tiny shoots of grass emerged where her toes touched, and the faint shimmer of dew appeared along the edges of cracks, emphasizing the vitality her presence invoked. It was as if the earth itself recognized her resilience, rewarding her patience and endurance by aligning with her very essence. The villagers who had witnessed the spectacle felt the shift instinctively, a deep, unsettling acknowledgement that she was no ordinary girl. The cruelest villagers, now trembling and humiliated, felt an almost magnetic force in her presence. Their hearts pounded as they instinctively recoiled, unable to approach her without a sense of dread. The marketplace, once the stage for their dominance, had inverted into a theater of the girl's power. She needed no words, no displays of aggression. Her dignity, patience, and endurance had already invoked forces beyond mortal understanding. Every eye in the market square turned toward her, some with fear, others with awe, all acknowledging the transformation that had quietly taken place. Even the air seemed different near her. Merchants, who had only moments before been laughing at her cracked feet, now coughed and drew back, sensing an energy that tingled along their skin. The birds above stirred uneasily, circling and crying as though aware of the girl's connection to the natural world. The wind whispered through the stalls, rustling fabric and scattering loose dust in deliberate patterns, as if announcing her silent authority to the entire village. Nature itself seemed to bend subtly toward her, a testament to the depth of her newfound power. The girl's face remained calm, almost radiant in its serenity. Her eyes held a quiet intensity, focused inward yet infinitely perceptive of the world around her. Villagers who had once sought to humiliate her now glimpsed a hint of something eternal within her, a connection to the earth, a mystical protection that ensured she could not be harmed. With every step she took, the ground seemed to respond. A crack would realign, a small puff of dust would drift in her direction, or a faint glow would shimmer where her feet had pressed. These subtle signs reinforced the understanding that she was more than human, that her spirit had merged with the enduring, watchful essence of the land itself. The marketplace, though still scarred, seemed to accommodate her presence. The broken stalls, scorched soil, and displaced goods now formed a kind of stage, highlighting the girl as both central figure and guardian of justice. The spectators, initially fearful, now watched with a mix of awe and hesitation. Even those who had not mocked her recognized the extraordinary nature of her power, the way the earth itself seemed to bend subtly toward her favor. She exuded a quiet command, a presence that spoke of resilience, patience, and an unyielding connection to the forces that governed both the physical and mystical worlds. Every movement she made reinforced this impression. A slight step, a casual shift of weight, even a gesture of straightening her simple garments seemed to ripple through the environment. Dust swirled in patterns around her, grass quivered in delicate synchrony, and the air itself vibrated with a faint hum that only the most attuned could perceive. The cruel villagers felt this hum penetrate their bones, an invisible yet palpable reminder that the girl's endurance had been acknowledged and empowered by something far greater than themselves. By late afternoon, whispers spread among the onlookers. Merchants spoke in hushed tones, elders nodded knowingly, and children watched in wide-eyed wonder. "She is not like us," one muttered. "The earth itself favors her," said another. Even those who had participated in her humiliation could not ignore the signs. Her presence was a force, quiet yet undeniable, a living testament to patience, virtue, and the power of enduring injustice with dignity. The girl's rising power was subtle but transformative. She remained unharmed, untouched by the cruelty and chaos that had erupted around her, and yet the very ground seemed to acknowledge her presence as sacred. Every element, the soil beneath her feet, the air around her, even the distant whispers of the wind, conspired silently to affirm her authority and mystical protection. In the marketplace, the lesson was clear. The earth aligns itself with the just, nurtures those who endure with virtue, and responds to cruelty with forces beyond mortal comprehension. The girl, radiant in her calm authority, embodied this truth, a living symbol of resilience, justice, and mystical power.